listeners, and welcome to the NK News Podcast. I'm your host, Jacco Zwetsloot, and it is the morning of Saturday, the 19th of February here in Seoul, and I'm joined in the NK News recording studio by Tom McDevitt of the Washington Times. We're here to discuss the recent World Peace Summit 2022 and the Universal Peace Foundation and its mission to bring about the unification of Korea and peace on the peninsula, amongst other topics. Before we get started, I'd like to remind you all, please, to leave a review about this podcast wherever you can and to share it on social media. And this is so that people can find our podcast more easily and we can get a bigger audience. Secondly, check out nknews.org and consider buying a subscription. Third, follow me on Twitter at Jacco Z. For podcast suggestions and feedback, you can tweet us or email us at podcast@nknews.org. All right, my guest today, sitting across from me at the NK News recording studio table, is Mr. Thomas P. McDevitt. He is chairman of the Washington Times News Media Company. He's also chairman of H.J. Magnolia U.S. Holdings, which is a corporate group that includes the New Yorker Hotel, Manhattan Center Production Studio, Ocean Peace Fishing Company, and the Washington Times. He also serves as vice chairman of H.J. Magnolia Global Foundation, which includes the five U.S. companies, along with 13 firms in Korea and 28 companies in Japan. It's quite a full portfolio. Welcome on the show, Tom.
Thank you, Jacco. Very good to be here.
It's great to have you. Yeah, Tom, you've worked at the Washington Times for a long time. What market segment of U.S. media readership does it appeal to? It's generally known to be conservative, but tell us a bit more about that.
Well, I appreciate that. And we're excited. This year is our 40th anniversary. On May 17th, 1982, Ronald Reagan was in office for about a year and a half.
Right.
The Washington Post was the only game in town. The Washington Star had folded about 2 years prior. And the founders of the Times thought, given the importance of media in a free society, there ought to be a second voice in the nation's capital. So 40 years ago, we launched, and the audience of the Times is a terrific sphere of influence in America. It skews a bit male to female, about 55, 45, a bit of an older cohort, but also we have people from all political persuasions and all generations that follow us, especially online. So WashingtonTimes.com, in a sense, is our main product. We still do a 5-day-a-week print newspaper in the nation's capital. And
it's not an easy time for legacy print media these days, anywhere in the world, especially in the United States.
That's true, but Washington is a unique place, and there's still a generation of people that want to read newsprint. And because of the Capitol, the White House, the federal enclave, all the influencers in Washington, it's important to have the print copy as well.
Now, it was founded, as you say, 40 years ago. At the prompting of the late Reverend Sun Myung Moon. The Reverend Moon also founded a church that is now known as the Family Federation for World Peace and Unification. I think the original name was the Holy Spirit Association for the Unification of World Christianity, which is where it got the name Unification Movement.
Right.
So that's unification in a sort of a more spiritual sense, but here in Korea, we normally use that word thinking about two Koreas being unified, but it's also got this broader faith-based meaning.
Of course, I mean it's a profound concept in terms of the role of unity, of teamwork, of coming together, even as an individual with your mind and your body, or in a family, or in a society. In a sense, it's the counterpoint to the Marxist-Leninist seduction of conflict, of the dialectic materialism. And I think that's an order of nature, as the Declaration of Independence and the founders of America knew, that the best reasoning comes based upon natural law and our rights coming from the Creator. So it flows along that legacy of philosophy, that the universe has an order and that unity is the way to move forward. You mentioned unification of Korea, of course. Whether it's from the faith perspective or the geopolitical perspective, the cultural perspective, economically, we see the Korean Peninsula as an epicenter of the 21st century, similar to Israel in earlier millennia, or Rome or Italy. And so that's why so much attention is being put on how do we make a difference on bringing the Koreas together?
Okay, now I do want to return to that theme, but back to media for a moment there. So I think the unification movement also has some other media outlets as well as the Washington Times.
We certainly do. Here in Seoul, the Seige Ilbo. In Tokyo, the Sakai Nippo.
Right.
And we've had previous media entities in the Central America, South America, and in Middle East.
Do you still own UPI, the wire service?
No, that's gone to another corporation.
Okay, so that's no longer affiliated with the Unification Movement. Okay, but it was for a long time.
And we're looking to expand the Washington Times in numerous different markets around the world and different product lines.
Okay. Now, would it be fair to say that the different media agencies promote the Unification Movement's agenda?
No. I think it's fair to say that all three of those entities, the Washington Times, Seige Ilbo, Sakai Nippo, are known for their reliable journalism, and they cover news and opinion like any mainstream media company. In terms of value perspective, it's a passion of mine as an executive that a company needs to have a clear mission, a clear sense of purpose. Like Simon Sinek points out, the answer to the question of why. Why do you exist? Why do we do a media company? What's the purpose of it? And in that regard, there are some real core principles or values the Times is based on. The first and most essential is freedom, applied to press, applied to government, applied to society, to human rights. Freedom, family, the importance of family, strong families, faith, the respect of religious freedom, freedom of conscience, and then service, living for the sake of others, the role, the calling of journalism as opposed to celebrity journalism or drawing attention to the author of a story is serving the public with a real true sense of mission. And then finally, a sense of participation and engagement, which I simply like to use the term citizenship. The Washington Times exists to inform and enable citizens to make the right decision. So freedom, family, faith, service, citizenship are the core pillar values, if you will. In terms of representing any particular faith body, no, we cover all kinds of issues in the social domestic side, but the purpose is not to represent the Family Federation.
Now, on episode 141 of this podcast, released in August 2020, so gosh, it's almost 2 years ago, I had our mutual friend Michael Breen on the show to talk about his time reporting on North Korea. He used to write for the Washington Times back in the 80s and 90s, and his several meetings with Kim Il-sung. He also talked about the meeting that took place just over 30 years ago in North Korea between Reverend Moon and President Kim Il-sung. At the time, it was quite a historic meeting. I encourage our listeners to go back and listen to him talk about that. But Tom, thinking about both men, Reverend Moon and President Kim, the late Kim Il-sung, they have a few things in common. They both started and ran their own organizations, one a country and the other a church and ultimately business conglomerate. They instilled a very strong sense of loyalty in their followers. Both were born in what is today North Korea. And they both saw themselves as uniquely chosen by God or history, or both, to lead the Korean people and perhaps even the world to a brighter future. And they're both somewhat controversial figures. I think that's fair to say. But for decades, they really hated each other. They had a very strong dislike of each other. And Moon especially was known for his denunciations of communism around the world. And we see that, as you said, freedom is still a strong part of the mission behind the Washington Times. And now Mike Breen told a little bit about how they came together to meet in December 1991. But what did they see in each other? Did they recognize kindred spirits when they met, do you think?
I think that's a fascinating question. And I have the greatest respect for Mike Breen. His book, The New Koreans, I think is a must read for anyone who pays attention to what's going on in this part of the world.
Also, his biography of Kim Jong-il before it became fashionable.
That's right. That's right. The visit that took place in 1991 was remarkable in a lot of ways. Prior to that, not only were they adversaries in terms of freedom versus communism, etc., but Reverend Moon ended up being in Hangnam prison for almost 3 years, a death camp. And that was the decision that came from Kim Il-sung. So what you have here is, in a way, I like to put it in terms of biblical proportions. You have these arch enemies, and the Reverend is reaching out, in terms of how Jesus looked at the world of loving your enemy, right? So it was him and his wife, Dr. Sun Myung Moon, who visited North Korea, didn't know if they'd get out, if they'd return. And the purpose was to engage heart to heart. And in looking at the accounts of what was said, and colleagues of mine were there, including my sister-in-law. And,
okay, but you yourself were not there.
I was not there, unfortunately, but the accounts of the conversation of what did Reverend Moon say across the table to Kim Il-sung. I think that's something people need to pay attention to, because he was straight, clear, forceful in his sense of truth, challenging the Juche philosophy, right? Straight to the heart of it, Jacco, of it's not going to work. Why? Because it's based upon a false premise. What's that? Materialism. Human beings are not simply animals or physical beings, that there's a spiritual nature to reality. And he challenged Kim Il-sung to open up, to allow religious freedom, to allow freedom of assembly in the press. Can you imagine that? Mm-hmm. I mean, if you even raise a criticism of Kim Il-sung, or Kim Jong-un in these days, you're off to someplace unfortunate. So I have to say, in looking back over that time, and it's 30 years ago, this is a proper time to reflect on it and learn from it. It was extraordinary, an extraordinary opportunity. Brings up what President Donald Trump did with Kim Jong-un, the whole idea of engaging. But
how did Kim respond? What did he say back to this criticism?
Of course, I wasn't there, but it was an engagement. They ended up, I guess, the best way to answer that question is what preceded. What was the outcome of those meetings?
Right.
And there were a number of points that were agreed upon, certain kind of an MOU or letter of intent to work together on certain things, to foster tourism, to foster trade. As you probably are aware, the Reverend eventually went on to open up, our business interests, Pyongyang Motors.
Yes.
A hotel. We started to build economic...
I think the Botonggang Hotel.
That's right.
In Pyongyang and Pyongyang Motors. Pyongyang Motors, is that still owned by the Unification
Movement?
No,
we ended up handing that over to the North Koreans.
Okay.
That was Dr. Sun Moon's decision. So I think that was wise, and let them run it. But beyond that, in terms of the economic development of North Korea, which is so vital.
Yeah.
We're in the World Summit that just occurred. One of our regular keynote speakers is our good friend Jim Rogers,
right?
Whose story I think gets headlines because he paints the picture that the hottest place on the planet to invest once the 38th parallel comes down will be the Korean Peninsula. And so he kind of follows along the legacy that economic development is so essential. So I applaud what Reverend Moon did in those days. It was certainly counterintuitive and countercultural, bold, but it expressed, I think, in a most unique way, Jacco, this whole idea of how to engage the enemy and turn the enemy into someone who is a lost brother, so to speak.
Yeah, I recall Mike Breen saying that they got on quite well with each other, and there's even a photograph of the two of them holding hands as a sign of intimacy. I wonder, if they sort of recognized some similarities in each other.
I think there's no question. You can see that in the body language. But further, since that time, when anniversaries occur, birthdays occur, North Korea sends flowers to commemorate the Reverend's passing. This coming summer will be the 10th anniversary.
Right. And did they send a condolence message or some flowers?
Last 3 or 4 years. Prior to the COVID pandemic. I was there. I saw it was amazing. A note from Kim Jong-un and
from Kim Jong-un.
Yeah, from Kim and bouquets of flowers. Quite grand.
And that's even though there's no longer active investment by the Unification Movement in North Korea.
Their humanitarian efforts, given the limitations of cross-border interactions.
Sure.
But I think we're looking for opportunities that help bring North Korea into the international community And when those opportunities open up with guidance and help from people like Mr. Rogers and others around the world, we see a great and significant meaning to prompting economic development in the North.
Now, studying North Korea and understanding Reverend Moon's movement have something in common in that there are many organizations and affiliates and sister organizations, and names sometimes change and sometimes new projects are started and older ones are folded. So it can be a bit dizzying. You need sometimes a big organizational chart, like the organizational chart that NK News produced. We may still have it on sale. You can find it at nknews.org/shop, the organizational chart of North Korea. In the 1990s, there was the Tongil Group, which was ranked number 35 in size among South Korean chaebol or conglomerates, which was responsible for all this business with North Korea that you mentioned, and also it did some heavy industry with the blessing of the South Korean government. But then came the Asian financial crisis, and now we don't hear about the Tongil Group so much anymore. Can you help us to understand that part of the unification movement that deals with North Korea? What are the different organizations and the different activities?
Well, let's go back to the Tongil Group. It's under a new brand, HJ Magnolia Korea.
Okay.
And first I want to make a pitch for NK News, by the way.
Thank you.
I have been a subscriber, I think, for 3 or 4 years, and I think the work that you people do is essential for anyone paying attention to this part of the world. So congratulations on that. And on the podcast as well. But in terms of Tongil Group, it's HJ Magnolia Korea. That's 13 different companies. Of course, we have Segeolbo at the Yeongpyeong Resort, where the Pyeongchang Alpine Slalom was done. Pine Ridge Golf Course, a resort down in the southern part of the country, doing quite well. Machining, construction, Ilhwa Ginseng. My counterpart here, Mr. Gerard Willis, was formerly with Honeywell as General Counsel of Asia. Lived in China for a number of years. A terrific executive. I'd encourage you to have him on air to give you an overview of where the companies are at.
Yeah.
And we collaborate quite a bit. In terms of the North Korea matter,
right.
I think the most important organization now globally is the Universal Peace Federation.
Okay.
And that's the NGO that has consultative status, general consultative status at the UN, founded by the Reverend and Mrs. Moon in 2005. People in, I'm going to say it's 185 countries now, where chapters or entities are working there. And that's been the primary platform to engage the Korean Peninsula, both north and south. And what's most interesting here is the multifaceted, I'd call it a grand strategy approach. Not only grand strategy, but an enlightened approach. Meaning there's a sense of spirituality and transcendent values, not simply the military, economic, political side of the coin. I think that's so essential because you're dealing with humanity. So UPF then launched with Dr. Hak Ja-han Moon's involvement, and I think it was a stroke of genius. And I think you saw it when you came to the conference a couple days ago. 7 different associations that cover the core areas of culture and society. Elected officials at the executive level, a whole network of heads of state, a network of parliamentarians, over 6,000 incumbent parliamentarians from these 160-some countries. The media, which I help organize, the International Media Association for Peace, which we'd invite NK News to certainly consider partnering and being cross-fertilizing all of that. A business network, the International Association for Peace and Economic Development. Jim Rogers has been involved there. And these are investors, corporate heads, business school professors all over the world who care about a corporate approach to leadership that profits are for the sake of a higher purpose than just for the shareholder. There's an academic network, thousands of academics, multidisciplinary, a network of people in the arts, and of course the faith side, interfaith. And when you put those 7 channels together, it's so amazing to see what happens. And the cross-fertilizing and the synergy. The interesting thing that Dr. Hak Ja-han Moon has done, and I really applaud her for this, is drive this focus, this true north compass setting, that we can make a difference as the global community on dealing with the Korean Peninsula. And that's what's going to take. Civil society, multifaceted, working with the public sector, working with communications over the long term to create the environment that is irresistible for the North to go through a transformation.
So you mentioned that there are heads of state, there are parliamentarians. Does the Universal Peace Federation work together with the governments of South Korea and North Korea?
Of course, we work closely with, starting in the National Assembly. Several of my colleagues are very involved there with leaders on all the different parties. The Speaker of the House, of course, was involved in the World Summit with some meetings. And there have been ongoing programs, go back 10, 15 years, of providing opportunities to engage elected officials at the parliamentarian level, as well as the Blue House and different ministries, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, etc. One of the interesting things we've done in the past, which might be of interest, I think, to your colleagues at NK News, are Washington Times-based fact-finding trips. We did this in the Cold War, took Western reporters behind the Iron Curtain in the Soviet Union and in China. We've held about 15 of those with journalists from the U.S., along with former people in the intelligence community and elected officials, members of Congress, current and former, coming to Seoul, Tokyo, etc., engaging with counterparts here. We look forward at some point to holding a World Summit, as you saw, here in town, someday in Beijing, someday in Pyongyang. And I think the more open the North can be to allow for discourse outside of its closed ranks, the healthier it will become and the better it will be.
Now, the unification movement is known for being anti-communist and close to the conservative side of US politics. How is it that at the same time there's strongly pro-engagement with North Korea, which is not often something that conservative people are in favor of? How do we square that circle?
Well, I think it's all based on a matter of your view of humanity, your view of life. Without a doubt, and let me start here. And I think this is a fabulous billion-dollar brand idea. And it came from Dr. Hakchan, is looking at the world as a family of nations, using the family model as a paradigm. In that sense, you're looking at North Korea not as the enemy, but as brothers and sisters of a family that are separated. They're guided or driven by a view of life that we see to be counterproductive. And yet, how do you change that? It's by embracing, engaging. Certainly, peace through strength, a la Ronald Reagan, is a guiding principle. America needs to be strong. So does South Korea, and as well as the Quad and the other allies, and especially in light of the growth of China. But squaring that, what might seem as a contradiction, is simple. It's the only way through this horrendous problem that North Korea sets up, is to engage it and pull the society into the international community. So
is that difficult sometimes when writing for conservative audiences or talking to conservative people to convince them or persuade them of the importance of engagement with North Korea, when often we hear from conservatives that the best thing to do is to squeeze North Korea until it concedes?
Well, let's look at what happened during the 4 years of the Trump administration.
Well, I was going to say that you're probably in favor of his approach, I'm guessing, which was not as standard.
We were covering the news.
Yeah.
And what was newsworthy about it is that he broke the paradigm.
He did break the paradigm.
Of a global leader, of the top superpower in the world, engaging Kim Jong-un and building, as Secretary Pompeo said just a couple days ago here in Seoul at the World Summit Conference, he talked about the importance of personal engagement. There's no excuse for it. And so there's no way to move things in the global scale without that. And I think Mr. Trump was successful in that regard. At the same time, there's the carrot and the stick side of the coin, and the sanctions are still in place. But I think that more and more, the global community has a very big voice to share. And I want to add one point that was consistent at the World Summit. Mr. Pompeo, Vice President Pence, Secretary Esper, former head of the Defense Department,
right,
Speaker Newt Gingrich, in terms of the U.S. delegation.
Yeah.
And they all spoke about this along with former Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, Prime Minister Hun Sen from Cambodia, and several dozen other heads of states that came on video. And here was the key point. 157 countries today have diplomatic ties with either the North or South Korea. And we invited the heads of state of all those countries. We were grateful that Prime Minister Hun Sen of Cambodia and Ban Ki-moon co-signed the invitation letter to the head of state of all these countries. A high percentage of them responded. There wasn't a lot of time. Travel was very difficult, COVID restrictions, etc. But it's a fascinating framework of a global community of people that have relevance on the Korean Peninsula, beginning to move with a common set of directions or guidelines or compass setting, if you will, a vision that together we can make a difference. Now, what does that mean practically? Imagine Prime Minister Hun Sen, who has ties with North Korea, and you know the history, of course, with Prince Sihanouk and Kim Il-sung.
Prince Sihanouk lived for a couple of years in a very nice mansion in North Korea built for him.
Right. We could say there are deep cultural ties,
right,
to say the least, between the DPRK and the Kingdom of Cambodia.
Yeah.
So messages get passed, influence gets transmitted, mindsets can start to change because there's a safe communication channel there. Not only there, but also with Nepal and with other countries that the UPF group works with. I like the concept, Jacco, of what is called headwing. And what I mean by headwing is neither right wing or left wing perspectives, but a more parental view that's broader and more transcendent, taking in the benefit and value of both sides of the political spectrum with a higher end in mind. And so I think that expresses the tone of how we like to approach things.
Is human rights in North Korea a topic that's important to the unification movement?
Well, I'm here, as the chairman of the Washington Times. I run a media company.
Yeah.
I also run a series. I chair a group of very talented executives who run companies. I'm not really representing the unification movement,
right,
even though I've been a member and involved with that faith community for going on 48 years, if you can imagine that. Now, I'll talk about that as a personal testimony. No question about it. There is a sense of, let's talk about those core values that are universal values of religious freedom, which Reverend Moon shared with Kim Il-sung.
Yeah.
Religious freedom in China or in the DPRK. If there was an openness, things would change for the better. The freedom of the press. You wouldn't be able to operate NKNews in North Korea or in China. And so those are in a sense absolutes that are that's kind of natural law. The human spirit, the human nature wants to be free. And so with that in mind, human rights is essential. No question about it.
It's unfortunate here in South Korea that human rights is often something that gets pushed into the background when engaging with North Korea. It seems that governments here can only talk about either human rights or engagement, not both at the same time. So I'm just wondering, how is it possible to walk that line?
I think it is. I think it is, especially with a multitude of voices that are in harmony. Meaning, in order to see change, fundamental change in North Korea, it's not one thing or the other. It's got to be comprehensive, just like the human body. I mean, there's the economic side, there's the political freedom, there's the area of information and education. I think the world is beginning to see look at the power of Korean culture with K-pop and Korean food and the products that are all over the world, from Samsung and LG and SK, etc., the Hyundai. It's amazing to see the impact of South Korea on the world. And I think I see a phenomenon going on in my travels and my work with colleagues all over the world, that the world's beginning to pay attention to Korea. And there's a mystery about North Korea. There's fear. The more that Kim Jong-un fires off missiles, almost like firecrackers in the month of January. What in the world is he trying to do? You know, why are we in the 21st century? Why is he putting people into those gulags or those prisons for speaking their mind or reading a Bible or whatever it is? That has to stop. It's not conducive in the 21st century to where the human race should be. And yet, the paradigm that we've been working on for 70 years of negotiating and the six-party talks and all the different amazing work that's going in the diplomatic circle, we're still at somewhat of a stalemate. So that's where I think I'm betting on this framework of a global community that's mobilized, educated, focused, multifaceted. And there's a push and there's a pull. And we also need the clear support of the People's Republic of China and of Russia. The Japan, US, South Korea alliance is essential. The Quad is essential. Perhaps a Quint, bringing ROK together with Australia, Japan, India, and the US.
Right.
There's a new, I think there's room now for innovation at a very sophisticated and yet very simple level of geopolitical partners. And that's, UPF wants to play a role there, along with the Washington Times and the other entities.
Now, you're in South Korea right now for the big event that was held last week, at which I was a guest, and where our friend Michael Breen also spoke, as well as some of the names you mentioned earlier. Every year, I think it is, the Universal Peace Federation has a big summit or conference in Seoul with a lot of these big names from governments around the world to speak. I believe you brought the program along with us that we can make available with a link for people to have a look at. Why don't you hold it up?
Let me show this to you. This is a backgrounder, the Summit for Peace on the Korean Peninsula. And I want to mention what's happened over the past several years, because the world summits have been they're a series that we've been doing. The first was, I believe, back in 2015, 16. We held one in Senegal, in South Africa. We've held them in Europe and in Brazil, around the world.
Right.
But the big ones are every couple years in Seoul.
Okay.
The last was in 2020 at Kintext, about 6,000 people. Ban Ki-moon was there, Hun Sen, Vice President Dick Cheney, Newt Gingrich from the US. This year was special. It was so challenging because of the COVID restrictions.
Yes, this was a hybrid event, wasn't it? Part online, part offline.
And we've learned from February of 2020, when we finished that World Summit, then of course COVID hit. So the organization shifted to be online, and we built a terrific studio in the Gapyeong area, a hybrid event. I think it's getting to the point of state of the art with augmented reality and a global broadcast network that literally reaches hundreds of millions of people. That's my team does that out of Washington together with our partners in Seoul. And so you have a series of programs we did from March, April of 2020 called the Rallies of Hope. These were 3-hour programs, fantastic entertainment, but then you brought in key speakers like some of the people we've mentioned that would deliver their messages about the Korean Peninsula. We called it the Rally of Hope, both in terms of a counterpoint to the pandemic that was bringing the world down psychologically, right? Where do you find hope in this kind of era? And it was a wise, sensitive application of a faithful mindset, a faith perspective, coupled with hardcore reality, brilliant statesmanship, wisdom coming from all these different parts of the world. I mean, think about it. You have heads of state, a former leader of Nigeria, Goodluck Jonathan. He's talking about why the Korean Peninsula matters to Nigeria.
Wow. Or
Macky Sall, the current president of Senegal, same thing. The president of Niger, the head of Colombia, et cetera, around the world. So you have this conversation building over 7 different rallies of hope from the spring of 2020 all the way around to August of 2021, where President Donald Trump spoke and Prime Minister Abe and Hun Sen and Ban Ki-moon. It got a lot of press. And why did Trump come? Why do we invite that? It was controversial. There's some blowback. Why are the Unification folks involved with him. It's simple. He met Kim Jong-un several times. He had a story to tell.
Right.
And it was valuable. And to hear him and Prime Minister Abe in the same space, you had to listen. Well, then after that, we moved into a new approach called Think Tank 2022.
Mm-hmm.
And I would encourage the NK community to check this out, because I think there's a way we can work together. Think Tank 2022. And by the way, folks, this book, which gives this big backgrounder on all this grand strategy we're talking about, it's not a plan. This is a roadmap of what's happened and where we're going. But it's available for free. I'm going to send you the link.
Right.
It's a flip book. You can check it out. But I was very involved with my colleagues in Washington, Dr. Mike Jenkins, Dr. Thomas Walsh. Our first guest was Mike Pompeo. And he was in a studio in Washington, gave a dramatic 30-minute keynote. And then you had a panel in Korea of experts, a panel in Tokyo, in Seoul, Tokyo, and Washington. That was three-way interaction live. All of that was, of course, recorded, edited, and made available in Korean television and all over the world. We did the second, if I could continue briefly, with Mike Pence, Vice President Mike Pence. And same kind of model. The third with Jim Rogers on the economics of the future of Korea. And a fascinating discussion. And then the fourth was just the other day with Defense Secretary Mike Esper. Same thing, live panels from Korea, Japan, US, and a very thorough discussion of options and ways to look at how to deal with the security matters of the peninsula.
So you're dealing with a lot of big themes. You've got a lot of big names. It surprised me that in South Korea, the summit that happened last week didn't get as much press as I would have expected, given all the names and given Pan Ki-moon's co-hosting. I mean, he was part of the organizing committee together with Hun Sen. What was the big takeaway of this most recent summit for you?
Great question. I do want to counter something, though, because my team is the one that monitors the pickups all over the world.
Okay.
And soon after the session was adjourned, AP did a story, and their hook to the whole thing was Pence and Trump spoke.
President Trump gave a video message, but Mike Pence was here in person.
And he gave a couple talks, and they were brilliant. They're worth looking at to hear what these statesmen are thinking about this. So you always want more press coverage. I think a lot of the content was carried through Chosun TV in Korea. But the team that we work with the International Media Association for Peace was very diligent in terms of getting the word out, press releases and broadcast content, and it was all over the world. The pickups, the reach is close to a half of the global population, 3.5 billion reach in terms of pickups and awareness of what was going on.
Was there anyone from the Chinese government involved in the summit at all?
Very good question. Not to my knowledge. There were invitations extended, especially by the co-host, Ban Ki-moon and Prime Minister Hun Sen.
What about the North Korean government?
No, but
invitations were sent.
Invitations sent, and I'm sure that they were aware of what was going on, and I know that briefings were made available. So we clearly want to engage and have representation from those major countries.
Because it is hard to talk about Korean unification without the participation of someone from North Korea.
Absolutely.
It feels a bit like a one-sided conversation.
Of course.
Yeah. So what do you, given that, what do you feel is actually achieved and achievable by these big talking shops?
Well, that's the essential question. I think, number one, you're raising awareness of the issue, the importance of dealing with the Korean Peninsula. Two, you're engaging a network of nations, as I said before, 157 plus, that are relevant. You're engaging relevant stakeholders who have economic ties, diplomatic ties, security ties to both North and South Korea. You're also creating a multifaceted network of interested parties, partners, etc., in the different fields of business, media, arts, faith, Imagine having thousands of major influencers in the faith community from the Christian, Catholic, Jewish, Muslim, Buddhist, Sikh realm looking at from a faith perspective, why does Korea matter? Why does peace on the Korean Peninsula matter? How do we bring about a change? Paula White, who was President Trump's spiritual advisor, was a key spokesperson, and there were many others. So that's a big takeaway, the multifaceted aspect. And I think perhaps more important than anything is the engagement of young people, college-age students, even high school students, all over the world, young, from millennials to Generation X and Z, et cetera. People waking up to the fact that human rights is an issue. We can make a difference about this, and people want to make a difference in their lives. And so I think I'm very proud of that, the work that's gone on to engage the next generation of leaders. I was just on a call before coming to the studio today with some colleagues in Los Angeles who work on college campuses all over America. And they're doing a series of conferences to wake up college students, university students throughout the states on the issues of the Korean Peninsula. So you have a movement developing there in South America, in Asia, all over Europe and Africa, tens of thousands of young leaders waking up to the relevance of the Korean Peninsula. That's fascinating by any stretch of the imagination.
Now, Reverend Moon died almost 10 years ago, as you said earlier. I think this summer you said is the 10th anniversary. North Korea, you mentioned, sent condolence messages and has done every year since then. And his widow, Dr. Hak Han Moon, has taken over the reins of the unification movement and is now the leader. Has the work involving North Korea or the stance changed at all, or is it sort of a continuation of the same vision?
Great question. I appreciate that. It's two things. The trajectory has not changed at all. The problem has to be solved. It has to be solved peacefully. That's been a commitment from the time when the organization was founded. But what has changed is the growth, the expansion, the depth, sophistication of programs that are leading to this end in mind. And I have to applaud Dr. Hak Han Moon. Members of the community refer to her affectionately as True Mother. She has an amazing mother's heart that has this intrinsic sacredness that transcends the unification group. That's really truly universal. I really admire her for this, and it's the reason why you can pull an audience together that has people from all different persuasions. Get in an elevator in the conference in 2020. There was an anecdote where a key member of the Knesset from Israel and a key member of the Palestinian government would never talk to one another. Bitter enemies, sworn enemies, in the elevator together, feeling safe, communicating. And that environment that is created out of the UPF ethos is not fake. And it's because I think of the tone that Dr. Moon puts into this that comes out of this sense of a deep sense of appreciation of the heart of true love and humanity and et cetera. So I really applaud her for this. And she's bold, very clear, feels a calling that is, I might say, to use an internal term, is providential. She's inspired in a way that you just really got to pay attention to what's going on.
To what extent is the Universal Peace Federation an arm of the church?
It's not at all an arm of the church. I mean, the church is a body of believers, and it has many facets and affiliates that are non-unification, all kinds of interfaith things going on in that sector. UPF is an NGO in the civil society space that's guided by three pillar principles: interdependence, mutual prosperity, and universal values. It's not a gateway into any particular faith. It has integrity in its mission, its goals, and that's the reason. I mean, I would ask you as a journalist, why do you think someone like as distinguished as Secretary General Ban Ki-moon or Vice President Mike Pence or Prime Minister Hun Sen these men aren't going to risk their reputations simply to come and speak at an event. There's a reason why they feel trust and a willingness to participate. And I think it's simple, because what's going on with UPF, what's going on with Dr. Moon is real. It's beneficial, not harmful. It's a plus for the human race. And I think some of the misunderstandings, especially in this part of the world, about the challenges that Reverend Moon, when he came forth in his initial ministry, challenges the status quo to go beyond the confines of one's denomination. And just as you see phenomenal innovation in the fields of technology and medicine and travel, etc., there's innovation going on in this realm of thought and of worldview. And I think that's the reason I've been involved, is why I continue to be involved, and I will to the last breath of my life. That somehow God is working in combination with the best of humanity to create a better world.
Now, here in South Korea, I think it's accurate to say that the ardent hope for unification has dimmed considerably in recent decades. Young Koreans are not particularly interested in seeing unification happen right now, and are quite comfortable with the idea, the reality that there are two Koreas, and would be quite comfortable with the idea of peaceful coexistence of two countries, not having to unite. How does the unification movement deal with that reality?
Well, again, I would speak on behalf of UPF here, because I do head up the under the leadership of Dr. Thomas Walsh, who's just, we must have him on this show at some point, and Dr. Michael Jenkins. The three of us work together as partners on the same team, and it's a Super Bowl team, and it's a winning team because of the commitment of the people involved. But in terms of this matter of the attitudes in South Korea of especially the younger generation, I think there'll be a transition in the years ahead when, because of the economic situation, the limitations of opportunities of South Korean young people, because of the economics here, the job market, etc., the world is the stage for Korea. And I would encourage young people who may see a limited future in South Korea to realize they can make a massive difference all over the world and deliver value so unique and so precious, and not to be limited in their perspectives. In addition, I think there's a big job for the media, Jacco, and I think it's something we really have to work on. I'd like to do a conference on this on behalf of the Washington Times. And that is, what's the role of the media in telling the story to educate citizens of the vital importance of Korea Peninsula being united? The economic impact that would meet the needs and exceed the needs of the younger generation in South Korea could be phenomenal if they contribute to this, just as Jim Rogers and others have pointed out. If the 38th parallel comes down and all those billions of funds that go into military preparedness are shifted because civilization mindsets shift, that's maybe some people would say that's just pie in the sky idealism, but everything starts with a vision and an idea. So I would say a major future for the younger generation in Korea is brighter if the Korean Peninsula makes this transition, and if that becomes the linchpin to transition in all of Asia, especially with the issues of China.
Why is Korea so important? Why is it special in the world?
Well, I think there's a number of reasons. I think the heart of the matter, certainly you have the geopolitical. The peninsula is in the center of all these major partners around it: China, Russia, Japan, U.S., Pacific, etc. But I think the most important aspect of Korea is the people. My late wife was from Jeollanam-do, and we have 5 sons. I know the culture well. I participated with the Unification Group for many decades, and I've seen from firsthand experience the Korean people are something special. And there's a heart, a culture. It goes back millennia. And there's something that they're able to connect with the world, live in all parts of the world, and embrace the world in ways that we can all learn from. I think there's a depth of heart. There's an inherent sense of harmony, the yin yang side of the coin, with spirituality as well as practicality. There's the tradition, the family values, the work ethic. It's amazing to see the products that are generated, the technology generated out of South Korea. It's no mystery to me. I think it's quite natural. Not that other cultures aren't essential and precious, but I think the Korean people have something very special to offer. And perhaps the final point I'll make here is these people have suffered intensely. Possible for Americans to imagine, in my experience, going through the millennia of hardship that the peninsula has gone through, being attacked so many times from their neighbors. So it's a very special place, and I'm happy to be back. It's been 2 years since I was here. Used to come here 4 or 5 times a year, and would love to spend a lot more time in the country.
Does Dr. Hak Cha-han Moon hope to visit North Korea for a personal meeting with Kim Jong-un, as her late husband did with Kim's grandfather 30 years ago?
I think the answer to that is yes, yes, and yes. And when that time comes, I'll be sure to keep NK News alert. So, because I think there'll be some major news coming out of that, right? But yes, I think that at the right time, without a doubt, it would be my hope and prayer that together with such distinguished global influencers like the people we've mentioned, the Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, Hun Sen, Gingrich, Pence, you name it. I mean, an appropriate delegation that would be relevant to opening communication, creating a paradigm shift in the way the world deals with North Korea. I think we can all work towards that. I think every media can raise that question, prompted at Kim Jong-un. Open up, don't be afraid. There's much more on the other side of the world than you could imagine.
Is Ban Ki-moon involved on an ongoing basis with the UPF?
I know that he's spoken. We were so grateful for him to serve as the co-host, and together with Hun Sen.
Yeah.
And he's spoken, numerous times, going back to his 10 years as the Secretary General during his time in New York. But we respect him greatly.
Here's the last question. What do you think went wrong in Hanoi in 2019?
Oh, that's a great question. I think that on both sides, to put it simply, expectations from the North didn't jive with expectations from the U.S. side. I'm not so sure. Some of the criticism of President Trump was he prepared? Of course he was prepared. And I think he went in with a certain uncertain intention. And when he saw that it was not going to go the way he expected, he simply withdrew. Same thing that President Reagan did with Gorbachev in Reykjavik. So I think, he still left that legacy of building a relationship, and the dynamic is intense. So hopefully those kinds of interactions can continue to occur.
Well, thank you once again, Tom McDevitt, for coming on the show. WashingtonTimes.com is the place to find.
Please, yes.
Yep. Are you on Twitter at all?
Yes, of course. Yeah.
Okay.
And
what's your?
It's I think # Washington Times.
Okay.
I'll send those to you, and other social media as well. Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you already have an NK News subscription, take a look at our NK Pro platform, which offers unparalleled services specifically catered to the needs of professionals who monitor developments on the Korean Peninsula. Inquire about access at membership@nknews.org today. And don't forget, if you have feedback, questions, or guest recommendations, please send them to us at podcast@nknews.org. Our thanks, as always, to Arius Dare and Brian Betts for facilitating this podcast, and to Gabby Magnuson, our post-recording producer genius. Thanks for listening, and listen again next time.